Greetings and welcome again to Life, Laughter, and Legacy with Roger Young. As you can see, I'm down here in the deep south of Mississippi. I guess you could say I'm where the crawdads sing. And you can hear in the background some of the critters that are down here. Well, what I want to talk to you today is about how I discovered fire and what the results have been since that. Well, I became fascinated with fire when I was just a child. I was always fascinated with electricity and energy and anything that made something else move. My brother and I took all the wheels off our cars and dismantled them. I learned how to take apart my metal toys and trucks to see what made them work. And although I don't have the aptitude of an engineer, I love to do ham radio. I have amateur extra license. My call sign is KM6NTY, Kilo Mike 6, November Tango Yankee. So I enjoy that. But when it comes to the joys of fire as a child, that was something really fascinating to me. I remember living at my grandparents' house in this old home that did not have a bathroom. It didn't even have hot water. Now this was in the 60s, and now I lived in Wisconsin. It was cold there. It was cold in the winter and it was hot and humid in the summer. And I remember during those hot, humid days of summer going to that outhouse and trying to swat and chase out every fly and insect there was that seemed to gravitate toward that outhouse. It wasn't enough to have the bad smell. I mean, we were just inundated with bugs. So I remember finding where my grandparents kept the matches, and I would go into the kitchen. I'd sneak them because they would never let me have them if they knew. But I would take the matches and some newspaper and I'd roll it up into a tube and light it and tried to clear out all of the spider webs and get rid of all the bugs. But while doing that, I was just fascinated with the fire aspect of it. I remember taking as much newspaper as I could and dropping it, after I lit it, dropping it down the hole of that outhouse and looking at all of what I would rather not see in the hole of that outhouse. I remember hearing stories that my cousin Joe Brewer told me of how that he made Molotov cocktails and would throw them out back by what he called the slough, and how that he thought that was great fun. Well, I didn't have access to the fuel, but I did have access to matches. And I remember trying to make what we would call clothes clip. Remember those clothespins? They had the springs on them, and you could move them in such a way, manipulate them in such a way you could make a gun out of it and shoot the matches that would automatically light. And if since they were wooden matches, they would liquefy the head and would stick to whatever you shot at. And I'm not recommending that. In fact, let me just give a disclaimer now. No one should ever play with fire without ever. And you should, if you ever have to use fire, have an extinguisher. I have an extinguisher on hand by my barbecue grill in the kitchen and in my garage. So but if you're a child or if you're a minor, you should not be messing with fire. And if you're an adult, you should only handle fire and objects that are dangerous with great care and according to the law. So let me just get that right up front now. This is a big disclaimer. I do not advocate playing with fire. But I remember as a kid living with my grandparents, and we would go to their church on Saturday nights. They had church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Saturday night, and any other time they could have it in other times. And church was just the big thing for them. And everybody would take turns preaching. And my grandfather, we called him Paul Young, he loved to preach. And I remember how that we would meet at the Booker T. Washington Meeting House in Zion, Illinois. And there would be all these various preachers there, Brother Bowman, Brother Bobo, Brother Bohannon, and they would preach at different times. And my grandpa, he would preach. And so it was just a fascinating thing, but it was the old line Pentecost, and they would be dancing and clapping and shouting and all the stuff that goes with that. And I have no criticism of it, but I'll tell you, it was definitely entertaining. And one time it got so exciting, this one dear lady, she got to dancing with her eyes closed and wasn't looking where she was going. She had her eyes closed, and she was praying and carrying on. And as she began to stumble and walk around through the meeting house, while she was praying, she headed right for where my brother was. And there were folding chairs, and they were set up, but she would walk right through them like a bulldozer. And wherever he went, he was a few years younger than me, wherever he went, that's where she would head. Scared him half to death. And he was running back and forth, and I tell you what, it was a show like you would not believe. Finally, he ran onto the platform, and there he sat on a chair on the platform. Now, that none of them ever stopped praying or singing or dancing or anything. I mean, it was definitely a fascinating thing. But what I did in order to entertain myself, I would look at my granny and say, "Granny, can I use the bathroom?" She said, "Sure, how do you go ahead and go?" So I would, in that Booker T. Washington meeting house, I'd take a swing by the kitchen. I'd go find the matches. I'd take a handful of them and I'd go to the bathroom. And there was always several rolls of paper, toilet paper, that were stored in that bathroom. So I knew I'd never run out. And I'd take one of those rolls of toilet paper and unwind it, at least half of it, and I'd make a big pile on the open toilet bowl on the lid. And I would sometimes put the lid up and just put it right on the porcelain because I didn't want to set the lid on fire. But I would drape it in such a way that I could make a big mound suspended over the water. Then I'd set that on fire, and the smoke and the blaze, it was something else. It was mystical to me. And then it would collapse into the water, and I'd flush the toilet and watch it as all of that went down below with smoke wafting up. And of course, I'd be trying to get rid of all the smoke because I didn't want to be found out. But then I would finally come out of the bathroom and go and sit by Granny, and she would pat me and say, "You're a good boy. Thank you so much for being such a good boy." And she looked at my brother and said, "Now, Gary, you should be more like your brother." And my brother just sat there wide-eyed. Of course, he didn't know what I was doing right then, but he knew I wasn't always good. But anyway, after a while, the smoke would come wafting into the meeting area where everybody was sitting. And finally, one of them would stop praying or singing, whatever doing, and saying, "Brother Young," she was talking about Grandpa, "I smell smoke." And he said, and everyone started looking around. Of course, I was sitting there. I was very innocent. My brother, he was there. He didn't get in trouble. They'd send someone to look around and said, "Well, everything's fine." Then they just go right back to celebrating the Lord. So anyway, that was one experience. And then I remember living one summer with my mom and dad, and we came home for the summer, lived at home, and they lived in this apartment by Lincoln Park in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And it was a two-story home with a basement down below, and we lived at the very top. It was a two-bedroom apartment with a living area, kitchen. And I remember taking matches. Again, I'd say children never do this. No one should do this. And I'm lucky to be alive. But I remember going into the kitchen, getting a saucepan. My mom and dad were always preoccupied with something else. And I would take a saucepan, go into my bedroom, and when I would drape a blanket from the dresser to the bed, I'd pretend I was camping. And I'd take that saucepan, tear up some paper, and light it with a match and have a campfire. And it's just the grace of God that I'm still alive. Sometimes I would even go under the bed and have a campfire. And again, I am so glad that I never, ever wound up burning the house down. But one day stands out in particular. My brother and I were on the porch. It was an upstairs, second-story porch to this apartment. Mr. Maldonado owned the place. He was the owner, a nice Italian guy. Could hardly speak English. He spoke broken English with a heavy Italian accent. My brother out there, we're playing with matches, and somehow we got my mother's mop on fire. It was one of those string mops. And it would catch fire. It really didn't go into a full blaze, but it would have glowing embers in it and smoke. It would smoke to beat the band. So I sent my brother to the kitchen. I says, come back with some water. He came back with an empty plastic kitchen bottle filled with water, and we poured it on the mop. But it didn't put out the fire. All it did was cause more smoke. I sent him back and forth 2 or 3 times, and my parents started finally asking, what y'all doing out there? And I said, we're just playing. And so in order to try to get that mop from, keep it from burning, we started shaking it over the banister, trying to shake the fire out of it. Well, all it did was just cause more air to get to it, and then it caused even more smoke, and then it started raining down ashes as we shook it over the banister. Well, Mr. Maldonado down below, he saw that, all these ashes coming down, and it scared him half to death. He ran to the side of the house, to the entrance to our apartment, ran up the steps to where the door was, started banging on it and speaking in Italian. And my parents didn't know what was going on. It scared them half to death. My mom looked at my dad and said, Louis, don't open the door. There's something wrong with that man. And finally, after several moments, he was able to calm down enough to say, there's a fire in my house. There's a fire. There's a fire. My parents opened the door and said, what you talking about? There's no fire. And he said, yes, there it is. There's a fire. I can see the fire. There's a fire coming down from up the stairs. So they came out, and there we were, holding the mop as it continued to smoke. They said, what in the world are you doing? You scared the landlord half to death. We might have to move. Well, anyway, he calmed down. My parents calmed down. I think my brother and I finally calmed down after having a different kind of fiery experience on our backsides. Well, anyway, as I became an adult, I had 2 kids and my wife. And I would practice being the crazy professor, and I'd have the kids. My wife was usually gone somewhere, and I would tell the kids, go get all the chemicals. They would bring chemicals out of the cleaning closet and from underneath the sink and all the other stuff. Let's mix them together and see what happens. And my little daughter said, ooh, this is fun, Daddy. And my son said, ooh, this is great fun. But I learned what not to mix and what to mix. Some of that stuff would burn the hair right out of your nose. Again, you think, I guess I finally learned. So I told the kids, don't you ever do that. So they didn't do it, to my knowledge. But I remember one day when we were living, and I was a children's pastor in Indiana, I think it was by Terre Haute, Indiana, and we owned a home in the countryside, and it had a big ditch out front and alongside. And there were houses, neighboring houses across the street and to the sides. But we raked leaves. We had more leaves than anyone can imagine. And I piled them all in the ditch. And I thought, I'll burn those things. So I tried to light them with matches, but they just never would catch fire. So I went and got some gasoline, and I dribbled it along probably about 100 feet. There was at least 100-foot ditch. And I dribbled it all along that ditch. And I thought, okay, well, this will cause them to burn, not realizing that it would have a disastrous type of effect. So and my kids were outside. They were watching and helping to rake leaves. So I lit one end of that ditch. Oh, what a sight. You'd think it was a scene of a battle scene of World War II. All of a sudden, that ditch came alive. The end of the ditch, it lit, and then it would go all along down the ditch. There would be a stream of fiery explosions. Boom, 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 along the whole ditch. I thought, what have I done? And then finally it was a raging fire, at least 8 to 10 feet tall. I turned around to the kids and I said, Matt, get the hose, turn on the water, bring me the end of the bring me the hose. I told Darla, go get the fire extinguisher. They turned and ran. And as Darla was running back toward the house, she tripped over a little bush, nearly broke her neck, but she finally came with the fire extinguisher, which was useless. And Matthew brought the hose, which was useless because it would not put out the fire from fuel. So the neighbors were starting to come out, and I said, it's all okay. I'm just burning leaves. It's all under control, folks. They just shook their heads and went back in their homes, and the fire did die down. Well, about 3 weeks later, a month later, we had more leaves. So I told the kids, we're going to help me. We're going to rake all these leaves in the ditch again. And they said, okay, Dad, but don't do what you did before. I said, we're not. I said, I'm not going to use gasoline. I said, you bring me the kerosene can. I said, that's supposed to burn slower. What I failed to realize, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but what I failed to realize is that I put gasoline in the kerosene can, and it all happened all over again. And I told the kids, Matt, go get the hose. Darla, go get the fire extinguisher. Again, the neighbors came out of their front yards, came in out of their houses in their front yards. I said, it's all okay, folks. It's all under control. I said, look at what I got. I got the hose. Well, finally, it did die down, but I learned that's not something you should do. Please learn from my experience. Well, then, as I shared, I was a children's pastor. I went to Bible college. I learned about working with kids, backyard Bible clubs, kids' crusades, gospel illusions. We call it gospel magic, gospel illusion, storytelling, puppetry, ventriloquism, making backdrops, did all of that. And I remember when we were in Terre Haute, Indiana, and again, we were just having a great time in ministry there. And then we went on to Bethel Church of San Jose. I remember being there as well. And in both those places, I learned to use fire to illustrate biblical truths. The only thing was it's like my elevator never went all the way to the top, folks. And I remember using a hand cannon. This was an instrument that had a little lighter, a burner in it. It was a tube, two metal tubes. You'd put flash paper into it, and ball of flash paper, and you push a little button, battery-powered contraption, and out would shoot a streaming fiery blaze, and then it would be a round ball that would just burst in flame extremely fast. Didn't even feel the heat from it. But I learned that if you scrape from a fireworks sparkler, scrape all of that magnesium off of it and have powder, and then wrap it up with the flash paper that was nitroglycerin treated paper, and you stuff it in that hand cannon. When you hit the button, it would shoot out and make these beautiful fireworks. I thought it was just absolutely amazing. And so we were in Children's Church, and I said, now it's time to, kids, would you like to see how God created the universe? They said, yes. I said, he separated the lights in the heavens, and I read the scripture. I said, let me give you a little illustration of what it might have been like. Now, according to what I thought, it would just shoot straight wherever direction, and the little flame within, a little ball of fire would go in midair, and it was safe. I've seen magicians do it, so I thought I would do it. So I wrapped up the nitro flash paper, stuffed the hand cannon, and shot it. But this time, when I hit the button, it did a curly-cue in midair and landed right in the kid's lap. And it seemed to be a slow burn, must have been a little bit moist. But I told the kid, it's all right, don't be afraid, and went poof. And other than a little black soot on the kid, he was fine. His mother was sitting in the back of the Children's Church, and I looked at her and I said, it's all under control. He's fine. I said, there's no heat involved. It's just extremely flat. And I convinced the mom to where she was saying, Okay, that was great. And the little boy, her little boy, who must have been about 8 years old, sitting on the front of Children's Church, just looked at me with terror in his eyes. And I said to the kids, would you like me to do it again? Thinking that surely this would never happen, what just happened. And they said, yeah. The little boy was going, no, no, no. I said, no worries. So I loaded it up. I double loaded it. I put twice the amount of flash paper in it. I said, kids, this is going to be a good one. I hit the button and out came the flame, and then it made a big ball. But before it made the big ball, it did a curly Q again and landed in the same kid's lap. And went poof! And I looked at him and I said, you all right? You're just fine? You okay? And the kid went, I don't know. I looked at his mother. I said, he's just fine. Not to worry. I said, well, kids, you enjoy that? They all clapped and cheered. The little boy went. Well, I didn't do that anymore then. But I remember also at Bethel Church of San Jose, I remember having great fun in Children's Church. We had, just in Children's Ministries, we had over 600 kids. And I'm just so grateful everyone trusted me as a children's pastor. And I remember one children's church, we had a couple hundred kids sitting in, we had a couple children's churches on Sunday morning, so we had a couple hundred kids there. And I was talking about how that in the judgment, as God would give us our awards for works that we did with the right motives, it'd be like, our works would be like silver and gold, and there would be rewards for that. But if you had the wrong motives, it'd be like hay, wood, and stubble, and when it was tried as by fire, there would be nothing left. I said, kids, let me show you how that is. So I had a big metal tray, and I had some hay, wood, and stubble, paper, and then I had some gold and silver jewelry in it as well. So I set that on fire and burned up all of the flammable stuff, all the stuff that would burn, and then all that left was the jewelry. And I said, kids, isn't this great? They said, yes, but they were all choking from the smoke. It was a big gymnasium, and there was smoke everywhere. Fortunately, it was the end of Children's Church. I said, kids, you're dismissed. So the kids started pouring out of there and meeting their parents as they were starting to come into the gymnasium. And I met with the kids and the parents. I said, it's all fine, folks. Everything is good. It's just an illustration. Well, on another Sunday, shortly thereafter, I was talking about on how the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit was manifested as like tongues of fire on the people's heads. So I had more flash paper, of course, and I had a big ball of it. It must have been greater than the size of a golf ball. And I called Tom, one of the children's workers, for it. I said, Tom, I need your help. Will you help me? He said, okay. He came up. I said, here, sit on this chair. He sat on the chair. And I said, kids, you're going to see what it was like on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. And I took that ball of flash paper and I put it right on his head. And he looked at me with question and eyes of concern. I said, it's all right. I said, the stuff burns so fast you won't even know it. So I took my sparker and I lit that thing and it goes poof right on his head. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I did feel that. I said, you're okay? He goes, yeah, I'm okay. But he couldn't see what I saw. It burned all of his hair within a 4-inch radius on top of his head. He looked like a Catholic monk. Oh, I didn't say anything to him. I just said, thank you, Tom. And unfortunately for me, he quit working in Children's Church. And I remember another time and this will be my last story. I remember in Detroit, Michigan, in Children's Church there, and had a bunch of kids. And I was talking about how God had put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, but after they sinned, they were cast out, and there was an angel there with a flaming sword. Well, years ago, I'd been given a machete from a missionary in South America. So I took that machete and I wrapped it with rope and I sprayed it with lighter fluid. I said, kids, you want to see the flaming, see what the flaming sword looked like? They said, yeah, they knew it was going to have great fun. So I lit that thing on fire. Again, I had rope wrapped all around that machete and lighter fluid lit it, made a great flame, great thing, and I was holding it just like the angel. Then all of a sudden it started dripping. I thought, what made this thing drip? I didn't put that much lighter fluid on it, but it had a nylon core. And that dripped all over the floor. I said, Children's Church is dismissed. And then I had to figure out what to do. And I finally stomped out the fire on the floor because it burned a hole in it, at least a foot and a half wide, a big circle of black in this carpet. So I thought, oh, man, I got to do something. I can't let the church deacons and the elders see this. So there was a wooden platform. So I pulled that forward about 2 feet, covered up that spot, and to my good fortune, I was never found out, at least long until after I left. So the Bible says the Lord will baptize us with the Holy Spirit and fire, but not literal fire. So I hope that you learn what you should do and what you should not do. And that is how I discovered fire.